some people in, and then we are going to get started. Listen, I am so excited. I have been doing worship management for the better part of about 15 years. And so this is something that I feel is my gifting. I know that I've been called to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen and we are going to get started. If you think that you have a question while the presentation is going, I invite you to write it down, jot it down, because I will offer the opportunity to be able to ask any of the questions that you may have as soon as we are done with the presentation for it. And I do have a little bit of a pop quiz that I give. And don't worry, don't want you to panic. That pop quiz is not to know if you know the right answer, but to make sure that we are all on the same page. So here we're gonna go ahead and get started. I'm gonna go right ahead and share my screen with you, my presentation, The Aviation of Worship. And I'm just going to hop right into it. One of the things that I love to do is to fly. But one of the reasons why I like flying has nothing to do with flying over clouds or being up in the blue sky or being able to look down on a city at night and see how pretty the lights are. That is incredible. Don't get me wrong. I love doing that. But one of the reasons why I love flying is because I love the way the organization, the different people that I see that have to organize in order for a plane to get successfully off the ground. I love looking through the window and watching the ground crew diligently work around the plane to make sure that everything is ready to go. I actually like watching the TSA as they actually make sure that the security is happening so that the people that are need to be on that plane get on the way they need to. I love watching flight attendants go up and down the aisle and make sure that everything is shut and they're checking to make sure that water is happening and things are happening. I love how sometimes, depending on the flight that you get on, you can see through the door before it closes, the captain and the co-captain doing all of the checks that they need to do in order to be able to plane that get up. I love watching all of that. And what's funny to me is that a lot of people think that when all of those people are done with their checklists and all of those people make sure that they have done everything that they need to do in order to make sure they get that plane off the ground, and they begin to be able to get what is that sign, that all clear. We have done our job that we need to do in order to be able to get the plane off the ground. But one of the things that you have to know is that the captain does not pull away from the gate when he is ready to take off. And the flight attendants don't knock on the window and wave at ground crew and say, hey, it's okay, we're ready to take off. And ground crew does not push that plane away from the gate or the breezeway or the bridgeway in order to be able to take off. No, once a plane has done and their crew has done everything that needs to happen in order to take off, they then have to speak to air traffic control. Air traffic control is the reason why planes not only go into the air, but navigate correctly on the ground. Your air traffic control tells the plane when it can back away from, when it can line itself up for takeoff. They make sure that the runway is clear in order to be able to navigate that takeoff, and they ensure that the plane has a great fly and then lands appropriately. That is what air traffic control is responsible for. So if you mind just kind of going with me on this successful flight, we have the TSA, like I talked about. We have the ground crew. We have the electrical crew that makes sure that all of the electricity and the working things are happening. We have the flight attendants. We have the in-flight entertainment. We have music. We have movies. We have podcasts that can play through actual things in the plane in order to make sure that everybody is calm and collected as that plane goes off. We have the co-pilot that takes pressure off of the captain in order to make sure that he or she can do their job. And then, of course, we have the captain of that plane. And you may say to yourself, Danita, what does this have to do with worship management or worship service? A lot, because you have the TSA in flight, but you also have hospitality and security. You have the ground crew in flight, but you also have your deacons and facility manager. You have your electrical crew when it comes to flying, and you also have your audio, visual, and media team. You have your flight attendants, who are your ushers. You have your in-flight and entertainment, which may be your music ministry. You may have your co-pilot, which are your elders, and of course, your captain is your person that is your pastor. But to make sure that all of these people are working diligently together for the flight and for the airport, we have air traffic control. For worship service, we have the worship manager. The worship manager is your air traffic control person. They are the person that lets everyone know how and when they can pull away from the gate, how to clear the runway so that everything can take off, how to keep the plane in the air, and of course, how to allow that worship service to land beautifully. Now, the worship manager, a lot of times when I talk about worship management or talk about a worship manager, people think that I have, when they ask me for a definition, they think I have this long drawn out definition that I have to give in order to explain what worship manager does. But I'm going to tell you very quick, worship manager, we have one definition: to clear the runway so that the preacher can get up on time. That is the definition. Now, on time is a relative term. It depends on your church. What may be on time for California may not be on time for New York, or what may be on time in Trinidad may not be on time for Florida. It is up to the church to decide what on time looks like or what it means. But the goal of the worship manager is to make sure that everything is out of the way so that the preacher of the hour, whether it's the senior pastor, whether it is a young person preaching, whether it is a guest preacher, our goal is to make sure we clear that runway so that preacher can get up on time. One of my favorite things, I want to put you in the seat of a preacher. And for those of you that may not be preachers in this room, go with me on this journey for a second. I imagine in my mind's eye, in my heart and in my imagination, because I am a writer, that a lot of times when preachers receive a word from God, they receive the word that they are supposed to share with their congregation. They may wake up early on a Sunday morning and begin to formulate that sermon. They may begin to start doing that studying. They are beginning to see how God is opening that scripture to them in a different way. And by Monday, they begin to formulate that service. They begin to formulate those words that are coming together. They are able to look into the Bible, or look in their correspondence, or look at different books that they are reading, and be able to see exactly how all of those things are coming together. And by Tuesday, that is when they get excited, right? They are excited that they are able to start seeing how the story or the scripture is going to unfold. They are getting analogies as they are going through life to make sure that they are able to convey that to the congregation, because they want it to make sense to the people that are in the congregation. They get to Wednesday night prayer meeting or Wednesday night Bible study, and they got to be careful because they are so excited about this word that God is giving them that they don't want to necessarily release all of it in that Wednesday night prayer meeting. And so they keep studying, they keep praying, they keep having these conversations with God early in the morning, and they continue to prepare. And by Thursday night, that thing has gone into whatever tablet or device or whatever notebook they put in its entirety. They know exactly how to be able to convey this to the congregation. By Friday night, that word is so powerful in their heart that they cannot contain themselves, and they are driving to church that weekend excited about being able to get that word out. And when they arrive at the start of worship service, they have a situation where maybe praise and worship, instead of going for 12 minutes, goes 35. And when the person gets up to do the offering, instead of taking the 3 minutes that they were supposed to take to call for the offering to come up, they take 10 minutes to talk about how important tithe and offering is in order to be able to give every week. And when they have a person get up to do intercessory prayer, instead of getting up and inviting the congregation down to pray and then to just start praying, they have a person that gets up and gives a 8-minute testimony about something that doesn't even pertain to them, but it's just something that they heard. When maybe the treasurer gets up to talk a little bit about what is necessary, that 1-minute slide presentation that they told the pastor about turns into 15 minutes. And all of these different things start happening so that by the time the pastor gets up, it is 1 o'clock or 1:15 or 12:45 or 12:59. And instead of getting up and being able to deliver the message that God gave them, they get up to a site like this, where the pews are empty because the congregation who has been there since 9 a.m., been there since 10 a.m., church has now felt longer than it actually is. And in their heads, it is time to go. And now this word from God is not being delivered the way it needs to, because people before that time that has happened have used their selfish desire to get what they think is necessary out to the congregation has come first. And now we have a preacher that does not have a congregation to preach the word of God to. And so that is why worship management is necessary, is to clear that runway so that preacher can get up on time. Let's talk about some worship management myths. The first one is they're going to rush the service. I cannot tell you how many times I have gotten this. Everybody, when you use the term management or worship management or even stage management, they are immediately like resistant to the idea. They don't want to be rushed. They don't want this service to feel like I'm hurrying up through prayer or I'm hurrying up to get to the next thing. That is not what worship management is. Worship management is not going to rush the service. The second thing they believe is that worship management is going to help me get rid of certain aspects of the service. Listen, if you have beef with the children's ministry leader and how long they do children's story, that is not the worship manager's job to make sure that that gets taken out of the service. That is an line conversation that you and children's ministry need to have in your office or in a separate conversation. Worship management is not to get people not to get on stage or not to be a part of the service. They are merely just making sure that everything is done in decently and in order. The next myth that I get with worship managers is that church will feel like a production. Listen, I cannot tell you how interesting it is to me that when you introduce just the art of order, that people immediately think that it's going to mean that it's going to feel like a production. The beauty of order is to make sure that everything is done the way that it needs to be presented. Notice that even in the Bible in Genesis, when you talk about God creating the heavens and the earth, when you go through the 6 days that he was creating things, it was done in a very specific order. And every new thing built off of the thing that he built that he made the day before. That's all worship management is to make sure those things fall in the proper order in order to be able to have a fulfilling worship service. They won't allow for the Spirit to move. That is a huge myth. That is not the purpose of worship managing. We're not going to rush through a song by the time it's getting done and everybody has their hands in the air and everybody is praising God. And you can tell that the Holy Spirit has fallen on everybody in that room. Our job is not to hurry up and get to the next thing because this moment is taking too long. When you have that moment where everybody is praying and clearly the Spirit of God is moving through that place, we're not going to rush through that in order to make sure that we get to meditation on time. Worship management is not doing its job unless the Spirit is moving. And so that is a myth that we won't allow the Spirit to move. The next myth is that they are going to think that they're in charge. Listen, your worship manager is not in charge. They are merely implementing what they have been told to implement in order to be able to have a fulfilling service. You cannot, under any circumstances, have a worship manager that walks into a space and thinks that the buck stops with them. It doesn't. The buck stops with your pastor, and the worship manager is merely there to facilitate those desires. And of course, the last thing is that they're going to get us out of church early. Listen, your time issue at your church, getting out later, whatever that means to you, is something that needs to be addressed before you implement a worship manager. You need to figure out why or what you are doing in your service, what the vision or goal of your service is to be. It is then that you put that worship manager in place in order to be able to implement that. Our goal or our job is not to come in and be like, oh my gosh, this church service is going till 2:30. It needs to get out at 1:30. And all of a sudden you have an hour shaved off. No, we don't do that. We continue to implement what has already been put in place by making sure that it runs tighter or that it runs cleaner, but not to hurry up and get you out of church early. Again, whatever your time is to be released is your time. It is going to be different across church platforms and across churches, but our job is to make sure that everybody gets a fulfilling worship experience. My favorite equation, if you're not a math person, don't worry, we're not going to be dealing in numbers today, but my favorite equation is the pastor's vision plus the pastor's instructions times the worship manager's implementation equals a successful worship service. The pastor's vision plus his instructions times the worship management's implementation equal a successful service. The worship management job is not to come in and give their vision. The worship manager's job is not to come in and give what they think is necessary. They are receiving instructions based off of what God and the pastor's vision is for that church. If one of my biggest questions I get sometimes is that how do we get our pastor to know that worship manager is necessary? Listen, you can introduce the idea, but unless your pastor thinks that it is necessary, it is not something that you can just drop in. You cannot have a worship manager without that being part of the vision of the pastors and of that church. And then from there, the pastor then will let everybody know what his vision is. That is a meeting that he has to have with media and music and elders and deacons and any of the other entities that you have in your church. Everybody comes together and the pastor says, this is my vision for the church. This is what I desire. This is how it needs to look every week when we come together for church. This is the template that I would like to use. And then he will let you know what those instructions are, and then he or she says, this is the person that is going to implement that, and your worship manager is introduced so that everybody knows that whenever they see that person coming, they are responsible for making sure that they are conveying or implementing the pastor's vision and desire for that congregation. Now, here's the deal. I have 4 pillars of successful worship management. These are the 4 things that I think are necessary in order to be able to run a successful worship service. And this is something that I ensure that all of my team leads also understand. The first thing is, what is my job? You need to understand what your job is. You need to understand what your job is. The second thing is, do I understand my job? Right? I just said that. You need to know what your job is, and then you need to understand what your job is. The second thing is, did I complete my job? You need to make sure that even if you know what your job is, and even if you understand your job, then you need to make sure that you complete the job. And the last pillar is, did I stay in my lane? Here's a great example that I want to give, and I don't want any of my audio people to think that I'm picking on them, but this is a great analogy to use because a lot of people don't understand this concept of pillars. The first thing is, what is my job? If I have an audio person that is in charge of making sure that everything is heard, then they may say to me, well, what is my job? Well, your job is to make sure that everybody is heard when they walk on stage. Do I understand my job? Yes, you need to understand that if your job is to make sure that everybody is heard on stage, that means that your microphones have to be ready, that you have to be ready when microphones go on stage. You have to understand what microphone needs to be turned on. You need to understand exactly, where that person can stand before we get any feedback, or where they need to hold the microphone. That person needs to understand where that is so that they can be heard. Did I complete my job? Well, it's not just so much as you turning on the board. You need to make sure that the batteries that have to go into those microphones are at their peak performance way to be able to go. You have to make sure that the microphones have been cleaned and there's any debris cleaned out of them so that we can get the clear sound that we need. That is what completing your job is in order to do. And did I stay in my lane? Yes, because if my job is making sure that everybody is to be heard, then I'm going to make sure that I stay in that job. I don't tell my visual people what is necessary. I don't need to tell my ushers what they need to pass out. Notice that when we gave that plane analogy, everybody, that your captain did not come out of the cockpit and give you drinks. The ground crew did not get on the plane and make sure that you got your blanket and close all of the bins that are overhead. No, everybody completed their job and they stayed in their lane. And that is how you get an efficient group of people to run together to that one goal. And then when everybody has completed their jobs where they need to complete them, then we are able to look to the worship manager in order to navigate that entire thing. Now, this again, as we move through this presentation, are some things that the worship manager is responsible for. We complete the next to final run sheet the day before service. We are analyzing that run sheet for any elements that will cause delay or require extra time. Listen, if you have a 50 voice choir that needs to get on stage, you don't need to be moving them at the time that they have to sing. You need to be able to move them before they sing. And so that is what that run sheet tells us is who is singing that day and when they need to move. arrive an hour and a half or more prior to first service. If your person who is running the service is arriving half an hour before service starts, you're already not, you don't understand your job, right? We need to assess any issues that have arisen the day of. We have a final production meeting with the media team and the audio team to make sure that everybody is on the same page as what to do. We ensure that all team heads have implemented their 4 pillars. We ensure that all platform participants will follow the 4 pillars. We report to the pastor any new information. Listen, sometimes people get sick. Sometimes people aren't being able to be in their place for that. So we make sure that they understand what is happening that day. We receive any final instructions and changes from the pastor. And we move all participants in place 5 to 10 minutes prior to start time. And my favorite one, we start service a minute prior to the actual start time. If you've ever flown, you will notice that on your ticket, whether it's virtual or in hand, it tells you when your leaving time is and when your arrival time is. One thing that people don't understand is that in flying, your leaving time is when they push away from the gate, and your arrival time is when they land at the next gate. And so even in worship, if you desire to start at a certain time, if you want to start at 11:30, you should not be sending the person on stage at 11:30. Your worship manager should be sending that person on at 11:29, 11:28, so that we can get into the worship service by 11:30. And it allows for any transition times that are happening in order to be able to have a beautiful and wholesome worship service. Here you go. During the worship service, the worship manager communicates with the pastor for any line of scrimmage changes. Listen, if you're a football fan, you know sometimes we get to the line, we get to when we're going to do that play, and we need to make an immediate change. That is something that we communicate with our pastor, and they let us know when that needs to be done. They act as team captain for all entities in the worship service. Listen, audio, deacons, some elders, not all elders, ushers, it's unnecessary to talk to the pastor about things that need to either be understood or implemented. They all go to the worship manager. They all let the worship manager know if there's an issue. They all let the worship manager if something needs to change. If they have any questions, the worship manager is the go-to during worship service. And a lot of times before worship service, they continually assess any issues that may occur. They move participants into ready position before they need to be in place. Again, we talk about that pushing away from the gate and landing at the other gate. They make last minute changes that are in line with the pastor's vision. There are times when I need to make a decision that I know my lead pastor or the pastor that I'm serving that day will be okay with, because it all still falls in line to what their desire for church service is. So that is something that has to be done. They receive any concerns from individuals that directly affect worship service. Listen, your pastor should not be getting notes from any audience members that they can't hear, or that this light doesn't work in the bathroom, or things that ushers do not need to be taking those notes. Those text messages do not need to be received. And it's a way of being able to kind of teach people how to stop doing that. But that is what the worship manager does. They receive all of that. The report to the pastor, any new information that is necessary for them to know. No, you're not getting a note about not having sound, but I may need to come to the pastor that is on that day, or my senior pastor that day, and let them know, hey, the person that you were expecting to be in this position for this part of the service is not here, or something has happened with this baptismal candidate, just to let them know and keep them abreast to what is going on as it affects what they are going to need to do during that worship service. We put out tiny fires, y'all. There are certain things that happen backstage sometimes that if I had a video camera or a video phone follow me around for a day, you would see how many times we're having to make sure that everything is running smoothly so that you can see it run smoothly. What did we say? We get the preacher up on time. We ensure a smooth landing. Listen, the job is not over until benediction is over. And that is one of the things that worship managers have to understand, or even your worship has to understand, all the way from sometimes Sabbath school, all the way to the benediction in your main service. That is necessary for your worship manager to understand. Now, as my favorite phrase, that was a fire hydrant's worth of information. But one of the things I want to make sure is that you guys have a little fun We're going to do what I call a pop quiz. And don't worry, it's nothing that you can't get wrong per se. It's not going to count against you or anything like that. But I want you to use the chat. We're going to have a little fun with talking about how sometimes service can be planned. And one of the things I want you to do, let's go to the chat, and I want you to put your answer in the chat, okay? Let's say you have an individual that says to you, hey, I've been, if you're the worship manager, if you're the person that's been put in charge and you're trying to get your run sheet together, and you say to a person, yes, you're doing meditation, is that correct? And they say, yes, that's correct. And you ask them, they tell you, I'm doing meditation with the band, right, that you have at your church, or the musician that you have at your church. How many minutes should you give that person to do one gospel song for meditation? I want you to start putting those numbers in the chat. How many minutes should you give meditation? 4. I'm seeing some in 6 minutes, 4, 3 minutes, 6 minutes, 5 minutes, 4 minutes, 4 minutes, about 4 to 5 minutes. Average is 5 minutes, 4, 6, 4, 5. Look at these numbers coming in. I will try to pull up the last screen in a second. 4 to 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes. Listen to me very carefully. If you have an individual that is coming into your worship management space and they are telling you that they are singing a gospel song with a live band, your first order of business as a worship manager who is in charge of that run sheet is to ask the question, what song are you singing? Okay, that is the first thing you need to ask that person. What song are you singing? Because what you do after that is that you are to go to YouTube. You should go to wherever you can find that music, where's your Apple Music or whatever, and see how long the recorded version of that song is. And then you add in time in order to understand how long that person should be. Let me tell you something, folks. 4 to 5 minutes is not long enough for a live gospel song. Don't ever make ambitious predictions on your run sheet. Put what it actually may be. That one song, depending what it is, a CeCe Winans song may be 7 minutes, a Tamala Mann song may be 8 to 9 minutes, but you want to make sure that you put that in correctly. And you want to give time, again, for them to get on stage, for them to get set up to sing, for them to be able to sing the song, and to be able to get them off the song. And somebody said it in the chat, yes, Brother Clark, each song has various times. So those of you that just put in that, oh, it's going to be 5 minutes. No, each week you are going to have a different number. And according to how long your preacher preaches, depending on who they are, you then build the service out from how long their sermon is. So I may need to know that maybe my 10-minute singer doesn't need to go on one particular week. Maybe my 12-minute singer doesn't need to go on that week. Maybe I need to put them on another week. My goal is not to keep them from singing. It's to make sure that that week of service falls in line with the vision. Okay, here we go. Here's another one. Pop quiz answer. Here we go. If you ask an individual, if a person comes to you and they said, my job is to talk about the last Pathfinder trip that we took, and I have about 10 slides. Y'all put in the chat for me how long you think a person will take when they have 10 slides. Go ahead and put that in the chat. How long do you take with 10 slides? I see 10 minutes in the chat. I see 20. I see 10. I see 20. 10, 10. 20. I saw 15, 10 minutes. Since they may expand on it, about 15 to 10 minutes. I see that 8 minutes. I see 15 minutes. Listen, Elijah, you actually answered that question correctly. How much text is on the slides? Let me tell you all something, friends. Slides usually take about 3 minutes per slide. Usually. And unless they're only showing pictures, and even if they are, give them about 3 minutes per slide, which means if you only have an 8-minute segment and they tell you that they have slides and you find out it's 10, let them know immediately. You can only do it in 2. You only have 2 slides to tell this congregation what happened on that trip. And maybe even set aside an afternoon program so they can elaborate. But when it is time for worship service, if that is the amount of time you have allotted, 8 minutes or 7 minutes, know that per slide, you need to build in about 3 minutes. So if for 10 slides, that's a half an hour presentation. Easy. half-hour presentation. And you may have somebody that'll say to you, no, you don't understand. I time myself at home. Listen, we talk faster in practice than we do in real life. We remember certain stories that we do in real life. Even with my first session that I had in here, I talked a little longer because I was so excited about what I was presenting. So it is imperative that you set the stipulation early on so that people understand if we're presenting this in church, this is what we have. This is the amount of time that we have. And then you'll be able to build the service out of that. Last one, I want to ask everybody what, based on your church, let me see, how long does it take, or should it take, or let's do this. How long does it take to take up offering in your church? If you know, how long does it generally take for the deacons to actually take up offering in your church? Put that in the chat. How long does it take for deacons to take up offering in your church? Listen, that music starts and those deacons take up, I see 15 minutes for offering, 15 to 20 minutes, 4 minutes, 7 minutes, 10 minutes, 6 minutes. I'm assuming that these 20 minutes is you all telling me the entire offering segment. And that's not what I asked. I asked how long it takes your deacons to take up offering. Now, if your deacons are taking 20 minutes to take up offering, and that is outside of the person getting up for offering to do their little talk before, you may have a conversation that you need to have offline with your people. One of the things that you need to have, or somebody said they need more deacons, maybe that's the case. Here's the deal. If you understand that it takes 10 minutes for your deacons to take up offering during your entire service, then you need to make sure that the person that is coming on to bring those deacons on takes a little amount of time, because in offering, you cannot move on to the next segment until that offering is out of your sanctuary safely and gets to its destination the way it needs to. That means that the person that is coming to talk about offering does not need to take 10 minutes to talk about tithe. They don't need to take 5 minutes to talk about offering. They need to get up. They need to maybe give a 1 or 2 line anecdote in order to let people know that it's offering time. And then they turn that over to whomever is singing, and they go about singing while your deacons take up offering. And here's the deal. Your deacons will take up offering at the speed of the song. So if you have people that sometimes will maybe sing a slow song, you're going to have a slow offering take up. If you have a people playing a fast song, your deacons may take up offering a little faster. It's all about learning the little things about your church so that as you put that program together, you know what happens from week to week. I want you to know that every week does not look exactly the same at even the Oakwood University Church, but there is a general understanding that I have as a worship manager when we start that service a minute before it's supposed to start, exactly what we're looking for, and everyone understands that vision, which is to get the preacher up on time, because the ultimate goal is Christ, right? We want to be able to get people to understand who Christ is. Nobody is leaving your church service talking about how great that offering thought was. What they are going to actually be engaged with is a lot of times your music on your preacher and the word that the preacher has to bring. So it is necessary for us to make sure we get all of the unnecessary fluff out of the way in order to get to that word on time. Here we go. So we have about 10 minutes left, a little over. And if one of the ways that I think I can answer questions efficiently is not for you to come off mute. I want you to stay on mute. I want you to type your question into the chat. And as you are doing that, I'm going to put my email into the chat, because yes, I do training for different churches, no matter what your size. I believe that even some of the smallest churches need a worship manager in order to be able to make sure that they are not having to worry about the different things that it takes for everything to come together for worship. So if you have any questions, or maybe if you wanted me to reiterate, or there's a slide or something that you all missed as we've been going through this, we will make sure that we try to get that to you as best we can. But what I want to do is just open it up for questions for anybody that may have a question. I saw somebody that says they need that last slide. And I'm assuming that it's the slide that talked about the worship manager's checklist during the service. So I will go back, and for a quick moment, I will share that slide with you all. And then I want to make sure I get to these questions because I have some questions that are popping up in the chat. So I want to make sure that we get those questions. And I want to make sure that we get that up on time. So this is the worship manager service checklist during the service. That is what we have. And I need you all to understand that your worship manager should only have this job. Your worship manager cannot be your AV person. Your worship manager cannot be your preacher. Your worship manager does not need to be your senior pastor. Your worship manager cannot also be on the usher board. The worship manager's job is to just be that, to be the worship manager for your service. And then, because there are many times that sometimes they have to step into a role in order to ensure that the service continues to flow the way it needs to flow. So if anybody has any more wanting to any of the slide points, I will make sure that we have that ability to do that. Oh, the pre-service. Well, so listen, you guys, I'm getting questions for these slides to come back. I want to make sure that I have everybody's questions. So here's a question. How do you manage the slide presentation that is too long? Does media trim it for the presenter? No, the presenter usually, if we have a slide presentation from somebody other than the minister, number one, when that person is asked to do that job, it is the job of whomever is asking, whether it's the minister or the program director, the person that is asking for people to be on the program. Because remember, the worship manager is not asking people to be on the program. That's not their job. They are implementing the vision. So whomever is asking the person to be on the program, if they are letting them know there's a slide presentation, and we all have the vision, or we understand the vision of how long church needs to be that day or how much time they have, it is that person's job to tell them how many slides they can have. And then the day of, the worship manager will then again ask, how long or how many slides do you have? Never ask them how long the presentation is. Always ask them, how many slides do you have? And if they tell you more than what has been allotted, let them know you cannot use that many slides. We're going to have to cut off the presentation. I've done it before many times. There's a very nice way you can let people know that they do not have the opportunity to take people over time. And then if you have a person that is like a serial time abuser, maybe they don't get to do it. You know, that's one of the things that sometimes we have a hard time in churches, is because we're afraid to make somebody feel bad. But again, if everybody has the same vision, or we are working towards the same goal, which is for people to see Christ, we are not going to allow serial abusers of time to keep, infringing on that vision. So, it's not about us. It's about Christ. It's about getting people to see who Christ is. It's about getting them to accept who Christ is. And so if I have a person that continually abuses that time or doesn't understand what it is, you may not get to go that day. And that has been something that has happened in the past, and it's done very nicely, very in a Christian-like way. Nobody's getting yelled at. We're just making sure that they understand what is going on. What do we do when someone goes overtime? We have several different ways that we ensure. First, if I have a person that has a set time, we do throw a timer on the back screen. That timer does flash red when it is over. I will then implement the band to start playing. And in a very egregious time, usually when you have the band playing, they actually they get the hint. If it goes past that, I've dealt with churches where they're willing to turn the mic off. And we will literally move on if that person is ignoring, and understand this is not, if the spirit is moving, that is different. If I am dealing with somebody that actively is ignoring what we ask them to do, then yes, we do take aggressive measures in order to make sure that that does not happen. You said, I believe in this role. I'm going to Brother Clark. I believe this role, it requires a very close working relationship with the pastor to know how much time the pastor needs for his time, both to start and finish. You're very correct. I have a different equation for each pastor at my church, and I know how long they preach. Not how long they tell me. I know how long they preach. I actually study preachers, and a lot of times, if I know that I'm getting a guest minister, I will actually go and find older sermons and look at their average time between about 3 or 4. It involves a lot, it involves me looking at that and making sure that I understand who they are. Every preacher has a different time. Even at Oakwood Church, the difference between Pastor Snell and Pastor Mann's sermons is a different, completely different time. So I do need to understand that. And I also need to understand who my musicians are, who my choirs are, and how long they usually have. Because again, we build our service around those two entities that we try not to move around in regards to having that. So yes, it requires your worship manager needs to know that in order to be able to do that. You said, what if you're part of a small church and members need wear many hats to keep ministry worship going? Listen, I know that in small churches, you don't have a lot of people to do a lot of things. The key to worship management is that all of the people that are having to wear many hats need to go to the person that's only wearing one, because essentially worship management does carry a lot of things. But there are times when the worship manager may have to step in and do something on the program. I have told children's stories. I have sung appeal songs only because I know that that is necessary. There have been times where I've had to take off running in heels to make sure that I go and acquire something that is necessary in order to be able to move that service forward. So again, no matter how small or big your church, even if you have people that are wearing multiple hats, find that one person where their gifting is time, so that that is the one hat that they have to wear. What is your guidance when people continually go grossly over time allotted? Listen, if you are a pastor and you have that person that is doing that, stop putting them on the program. That is a very clear message that they are abusing that time. You have to understand that when a person is doing that and they continuously do that, even after a gentle conversation, even after gentle, hey, this is not what we are asking you to do, and they continually do that, I believe that that is going in a spirit of selfishness. And so sometimes you need to, as a pastor, again, that is not the worship manager's job. The pastor then has to sit that person down and be like, look, you are not going to do this anymore until you understand that we have to come together. Again, it's not about us, it's about Jesus. And so that is something that I have seen different pastors do where, and that sends a very clear message about what that person needs to do. When is it too late to put in a request for that service? For the service you have. So like, we a lot of times about maybe, I would say about an hour before service, we're not adding any new elements unless it is emergency. That includes slides, that includes announcements. If you have a situation at your church or a thing at your church where you tell people they need to get something in by Wednesday and that thing is not in, it doesn't get added. And those sometimes are the hard calls that people have to make. But again, it's a something that you have to kind of teach people to understand, that there is an order to this, and that they are damaging the vision when they do not follow the order or instructions that have been implemented. So there is no such thing as, all of a sudden, if you tell the praise and worship team, for instance, that they have 15 minutes, then together you all need to make that understanding, so that you can't have somebody come up from the audience and decide to give another number for an additional 10 minutes. So we want to ensure that everybody has an understanding of what that looks like, and then make hard decisions around that Wednesday or Thursday so that people understand that at the last minute they cannot add something. So it says, what do you do? I have a private question. What do you do when a member takes time to write a check? Should the deacon wait for that member? No, no. When you, again, it's about teaching your congregation. Listen, if you had to write a check for tithe and offering, come on, folks, like that should have been done before service. When you wait on the person to finish that and you delay again that takeoff, just like in flying, people miss their connection. Right? So our goal in worship managers is not for people to miss their connection. Sometimes the plane will leave a person that is not at the gate on time. And that is something that sometimes has to be implemented, whether you're on the program or whether you are in the congregation on the plane waiting for that program to be done. They know where they need to turn in that money. And maybe next time they know to have that check written before that actually started. Is there a difference between a worship manager and a platform coordinator? I would say yes. Your worship manager implements. Your platform coordinator has a lot of times is the person that asks the person to be on the program. And then after they ask and they tell the worship manager who's on the program, then the worship manager is to make sure that those people are in place. I am always told who is on the program. That is on the run sheet that is created. And then I know who I'm supposed to look for, who I need to, have in place. So yes, that is happening. We are almost done, or actually we are done, guys. You're getting that message. So if you have any more questions, again, my email is up there early. And I am so sorry that I get a chance to answer everybody's questions. But again, I am so happy and so grateful to have you all in this room. We have to head over back to the main room. You all had some amazing questions. Feel free to email those to me if you need to. Let's all go to the main room and join everybody. Thank you so much. And I hope you all enjoyed this version of Media